Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I work within the standard, regulatory and thought leadership part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. With over 110,000 qualified members and further thousands of student members right across the globe, our profession works right across the property life cycle through land, planning and development, construction, valuation, brokerage, operation, financing, really across lots of different asset types as well, across residential, commercial, alternative assets and infrastructure. So as a result, with that huge broad canvas of practice areas, data and technology is having a huge and beneficial impact on the way our profession can work. And today I'm really happy to have Matt from Survey Booker join me to discuss his role in this. So Matt, please do join me.
Hi there, thank you for having me.
Pleasure, Matt. Now, I always like to, before we get into the bits and the bytes and the software and the technology, it's always great to get a bit of a kind of a human backstory, both on you and your colleagues and how Survey Booker started. So give us a bit of backstory, if you would, and on your background and indeed how Survey Booker came to exist.
Yeah, definitely. So I think like some surveyors actually, not a traditional route into the industry. So I started in very different roles. One was as an area manager at a retail chain. So operations and customer experience around that. And then also very randomly in the polo industry, so pony hire and stuff like that across different sites. So a very different background, but again, all around customer experience and processes and streamlining things. So that's ultimately how where my background is in terms of what we're doing now. My route into surveying was through a friend I met at one of those jobs, and they're in surveying. So I spent about 8 months with them and learned all of the ins and outs of how their business worked and how the industry worked, more so on the residential side. And then Survey Booker was born from there.
All right. Well, I'm always a great believer in, as I mentioned about bits and bytes, not getting too deep into the technology in a funny way, but focusing much more on the value of technology, because obviously technology is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end in terms of helping with productivity. So in a nutshell, how would you describe the kind of problem or problems plural that what Survey Booker does to solve for running a surveying business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose there's three or four key aspects that we try to focus on. The first is saving time. So that, if you're spending lots of time doing admin and so on, you're not able to focus on surveying and you're not able to focus on customers. So that's the key one we try to help out with. In turn, that helps to grow sales. So easier booking processes, or the fact you can speak with more customers means you can convert more. Third is, I suppose, customer experience, which I mentioned a minute ago. So by having a very nice streamlined process and touch points and so when you end up with better reviews, and the more obviously reviews you get, the more interest you get from customers. And then finally, compliance, which I know is a big part of the home survey standards that were released. We help surveyors manage creating job records that have all of the information together. So signed terms, the report, notes from the customer, all that type of stuff in one place. So from an audit perspective, whether that's internally or with RICS, then it's very easy to manage that. So I suppose there's a number of different aspects that the system tries to help out with.
Indeed. Now, I guess you'd probably sort of frame what your system does within that kind of umbrella term of CRM, customer relationship management. And unfortunately, I'm old enough in the business to remember how these kind of systems have evolved. They started off very much described as kind of Salesforce automation, which sounds very dry, and this much newer term now of CRM, customer relationship. How would you describe those systems and what they're designed to do in a fundamental way? Because clearly they're used across a whole variety of businesses, and obviously we're very keen to discuss their context in surveying. But what is a CRM and what's it basically designed to do?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So, so customer CRM stands for customer relationship management, as you just mentioned. At its core, it's designed to help you increase the number of sales you can generate, and it does that through how we help do it is all of your leads feed in from different sources. So one of those is RICS Find a Surveyor that we've recently integrated with, as well as other lead gen sites or your website or referral partners, because you can see all of those leads in one place and what status they're at, when they were last followed up with, all that kind of stuff. It's easier to help convert or nurture those leads at different points. But from there, I suppose our system's slightly different as it goes beyond just that sales process and helps with the survey management as well. So once you have got the instruction, you can send the terms to be signed, you can take the payments, you can provide all of the updates throughout the process. But at its core, it's designed, on either side to be able to have all of your customers' data and information in one place. So whether you're in the office or out on site, you know everything about that customer and you need to know it. So it helps build that relationship up and make it easier to manage everything.
Indeed, indeed. Now, I'd like to wind back slightly because it was interesting that you mentioned that issue of compliance when you talked about the home survey standard, and you mentioned some of the kind of features there. It'd be nice to sort of drill down even more deeply around some of the challenges about compliance, particularly when you have a kind of an automated interface to some extent with customers, and how a CRM does make sure you comply with that when you think of things like terms of engagement and scope of work.
So I think compliance has a number of aspects. It's typically, obviously, whenever you're providing advice to a customer, you need to make a note of what advice you provided, and it's very easy, I suppose, to think of a phone call and the fact you suggested a level 2 was appropriate versus a level 3 and not make a note of that. But actually later on, that's going to be helpful to show that you did do your research, you did provide the right advice. So being able to log those notes against a job record or a quote or whatever it is important to be able to come back to. Equally, then when you're creating the terms, what the system can do is generate your terms document for you very quickly. So by pre-fills a lot of the data, so you reduce human error, putting the wrong information into a document, or the amount of time it takes. So it's very easy then to send that on to the customer for them to view and to sign. And again, from that compliance perspective, if you've got the document under the home survey standards has to have a lot of sort of, I suppose, personal data in there, or personalized data, I suppose, such as their name, the job type, the property address, the quote, all that kind of stuff. So it's very easy to create those terms in compliance with the standard. The second is if you're, I suppose, signing your terms via a web page where you just click a box to say, I agree to the terms, that's fine. You can have a record that they've, I suppose, consented, but you don't have necessarily a record of exactly what version of the terms were signed. So if you periodically update those, if you do have to manage a claim in 6 years' time, well, which version did they sign? You can only easily show the current one. And then, of course, they're not as easy to personalize depending on how they're set up and so on. So I suppose the key one around the terms is it makes it very quick and easy to meet the RICS compliance around personalizing them, and also claims management around showing exactly what was agreed to, or even just dispute management later on.
Yeah.
But here it is in your terms. But yeah, beyond that, it's all about creating that that job record that's got everything there. So if you do have a dispute, you can see exactly what every single team member said to someone, and manage that expectation as well.
Indeed, indeed. Now, in terms of automation, I think sometimes people have a kind of slightly dark, negative view of they feeling automation almost is a sort of a destroyer of value in the kind of relationship with customers. How do you see that relationship between using technology and the automation that flows from that, but still that service angle, that kind of humanity almost of providing service?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a topic you hear a lot around automation. I think the issue is when we mention automation, we think of that one time we got stuck on a chatbot and couldn't speak to anyone, and the problem was resolved, versus the time we were able to speak to someone straight away. And I suppose automation ultimately isn't that binary. It's not full automation or no automation. It can be somewhere in between. So you can choose how much or how little you automate in a process. I suppose for us, the point of automation is cutting out admin time that doesn't generate you revenue, isn't necessarily fun for your team or for yourself to deal with, and slows down the process. So from a customer perspective, if a computer's filled in a terms document with data, you don't really care. The point is you've got the document with the right information in. If a payment's taken online versus someone dealing cash with you, you don't care. The point is it was easy to pay. So what the system's designed to do is take a lot of the admin out of the process where you're not actually speaking with customers and you're taken away from speaking with customers, so that you have time back to speak to them before they go ahead, so they know what type of survey to get, or to talk them through their survey at the end. So yeah, it's not about removing any contact from the customer at all. It's just about being able to nudge people at the right time or provide the right updates or take that admin away so that you have a mix of non-automation and automation rather than
Indeed.
one or the other.
It's that kind of blend, and I suppose there are echoes there of a typical retail experience now, where people have the ability to hopefully interact with a retailer in lots of different ways, both in terms of buying goods, collecting goods, interfacing with them in that way. And I guess leading on from that, I suppose there's always a sense that people think about CRMs as being a very kind of internally focused system. But clearly, CRMs can also give benefit to the customers in terms of their ability to understand what's going on. So how have you approached that aspect of adding value for the customer in terms of their ability to interact, once again, to some extent in an automated way, but at least know what's going on?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So yeah, traditionally a CRM system is an internal process. You've got all the information yourself to look at, and that can feed in from different places. But we've developed the whole CRM from a customer perspective as well. So for example, you can add a quote form to your website that's powered, which we provide you, and that data feeds into the system, but the customer can then get their quote straight away, or at least an initial acknowledgement that the search has been sent through. That can trigger out correspondence at different points, just to say, acknowledge receipt and provide a bit more information. But from there, the idea is the customer can log back in at any point to retrieve their quotes rather than having to dig them out of an email somewhere. They can log in and they can sign their terms if they're not doing it via the email, that they can track all the updates throughout the job, which again, they'll get through the email. But 11 at night on a Saturday, sometimes it's nice just to go and get that clarification that the system is telling them what's going on. And it can help to save those, I suppose, extra follow-ups. Like, did it definitely go ahead because they missed the email for some reason, or they saw it but they just want to double check something more tangible, I suppose. So we've designed the whole thing around the customer being able to interact with, engage with, and message, and so on from that one place. So not only is it, I suppose, an easy place for the surveying firm to see all of the information, the customer can see everything. They've got their terms there, they've got their report, they can see their messages, and then they can see their job history as well. So if they come back to you again in the future, they've got all of their information in one place. It builds that relationship up on their side as well as on your side.
Indeed. Now, I'm always very keen when I talk to people to emphasize in my job title that I talk about data and technology. So I'm always keen to hear about, once you've actually implemented technology, that additional value you get from the data, because so often people focus on the technology doing certain things and helping with workflows, but actually so much of the additional value comes from that ability to then manipulate, in a positive sense of the word, the data and get information from the data. So how do you see that working in your context of this kind of CRM sitting within a surveying firm, managing the process, but then you've got all this data that you've collected now effectively?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. So we've got reporting pages at the moment, and we've got big updates coming to them. And unfortunately, I was hoping to give you a sneak peek, but I can't at the moment. But yes, I suppose what CRM can do is it can automatically log the general data around a customer's record and so on, but it knows at every single stage what time something happened as well. So it's very easy then to run reports through the system that show you how many quotes you've received, how many instructions you've received, total turnover, how long on average it's taken between a customer inquiring and then booking, and how long between the appointment and sending the report out in terms of compliance around your own terms, of saying how quickly you'll release something. And on our update, although you can filter data already, we're giving a lot more in terms of visuals now around the breakdown by postcode or by user, rather than having to add the filters manually. So the idea is you can very quickly understand how your business is performing, either from the marketing perspective and understanding how your sales conversions are working, different locations, areas, job types, but also from customer experience perspective later on, how long are all the different stages taking, because you can get an idea of how long it's taking in days between the different bits. Is there a hold up on a particular job type in a particular area or a particular user, or so it can then help you to refine that process and support people. I suppose if you're running just off a spreadsheet, unless you make an active log of every single time in a different column that you've made an update for different stages, you can't run those types of reports And that's obviously as good as the data you enter as well, rather than it automatically just happening for you.
Now, Matt, one of the big things we always like to try and focus on is the fact that the majority of our ICS members are not working in the large kind of multinational firms. They're working in a whole range of practice sizes up and down the regions of the UK and internationally. So, how does CRM work for these smaller firms? Because clearly, large firms, they may well build their own systems or get kind of enterprise level systems from other vendors. So, how do you see these systems working for for smaller firms where they don't have the IT expertise? They simply want tools to come off the shelf, if I can use that expression.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose, because of my experience when I first came into the industry, was looking at it from a small business perspective. So it's entirely been designed around knowing that you'll be on the road and then back in the office and needing access to data easily. But you're right. Traditionally, people do look at getting a CRM from an enterprise perspective, and by default they have to, because of the volume of data that they're processing and looking at. But I'd actually argue that it's more important for an individual surveyor or a very small firm where you've got a lot of caps to wear. You're dealing with sales, your marketing, accounting, report auditing, all of those different processes, and managing your compliance and sales and so on is much easier if you have solid processes in place. So if the process is there to log everything for you, you can just focus then on surveying. And then dealing with the customer queries rather than having to manage everything else, because the accounting's happening in the background for you, the compliance is happening in the background for you, and so on. So yeah, from a smaller business perspective or an individual surveyor, day to day, it means you can sleep much easier at night because everything's happening for you, provided you set it up in that way. And you can focus on what you need to focus on, not all of these other hats that you've got to wear.
Indeed. No, I suppose for that very small practitioner, it's the kind of post tray syndrome where the letter will sit in the post tray because only you can go to the post office and put it in the post box. So, everything does end up, coming back to you. I mean, it's become a cliche really to talk about the sector being perhaps slightly behind the times in terms of adoption of technology. But what do you think people are still, if they are, misunderstanding about, CRMs and automation and tech, particularly once again from that kind of smaller practice?
I think the issue is twofold. I don't think it's just the industry's been slow to take stuff up. I think there's been a slow provision within surveying, a bit more so around software and so on. There's been a lot in the estate agency industry, for different solutions, but a bit less for tech. So I think that's part of the reason why as well. I think some of the conversations we used to have, and I think this has changed quite a bit, is opportunity cost of time. So I think we used to have a lot more conversations where surveyors were saying, well, I can do that myself. And yes, you can do the terms of the invoicing, the updates to customers, but that all takes time. And it was, not understand you could earn more or go to the golf course. If you weren't doing the admin, you could focus on the other aspects. So I think that's starting to change. People are starting to realize, particularly where the demand has been so high, that actually if you cut out a lot of that workload, and the customer doesn't care, they've got things faster, it's improved things for them, then you can handle more work or not be so stressed having to manage everything. Yeah.
Indeed. And when people do make the decision to implement a CRM, what are the obvious kind of pitfalls and mistakes that they can avoid based on your experiences?
I'd always say planning, taking time to plan. It's like buying a car. If you bought a car and put it on your driveway, but didn't learn to go and how to drive a car, you're not going to be able to drive the car to where you need to get to. You're quicker walking. In the same way, if you buy or invest in a CRM or any other tech report writing software, whatever it might be, if you don't take the time to understand how you want it to work within your process flows and how best to use it, then it's not going to provide you the benefit. So it's that planning, taking the time to understand what you want to get out of it and how it works, so that you generate as many benefits as possible.
And I suppose that in itself is a challenge when you've got a busy practice and you're thinking, well,
Mm,
I haven't got time to take time out of running my busy practice to do that planning. So I suppose there is that danger that people can get stuck in a vicious circle of not being able to allocate that time to plan and procure and implement something to get those benefits. Now, I suppose
yeah.
one last question. You mentioned integration with Find a Surveyor, and I guess once again one of the challenges I think for the sector is the danger of ending up with lots of different systems that don't talk to each other. So what's your view both about what you've done with Survey Booker, but more generally about making sure that all these systems talk to each other? Because otherwise you lose all the productivity gains, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're having to copy and paste data between every system, you end up duplicating workloads, and it's frustrating. Survey Booker was designed with the whole sort of premise of connecting systems together. So you're right, we find a surveyor, a number of lead generation sites, terms, payment providers, report writing software, all of those different types of things are integrated, which means that automatically when different things happen, other processes can run in the background, and before you know it, the report is set up in Go Report, for example, ready for you to go. With the data there, you're not having to separately remember to create it and copy data across. I think it provides two benefits. One is big time savings, and two is that removal of human error from potentially copying the wrong stuff across. And obviously, particularly with GDPR and all that kind of stuff, it's important. But I think, when I first started it, I was sort of slightly apprehensive that perhaps people would be closed off to connecting, and it was being completely the opposite. Everyone has been very, very keen to, interoperate, and we're seeing it more and more and more. There's more requests and there's more things coming in terms of integrations and so on. So it's exciting. But yeah, I think again it comes back to that data point you mentioned, which is the more things can connect, the more you can understand your data and get insights.
Indeed. I guess a final question, Matt. What do you see as the future, both for your product sort of roadmap and generally for the sector? Do you think that the sector really is embracing technology now, and what will you be doing to make sure that your solution, delivers all these extra benefits that can come from this interconnectivity?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's going to become more and more connected. So anything that doesn't connect at the moment will do. I know we're speaking to systems at the moment that perhaps can't connect, and we're making plans to enable that where it isn't technically possible currently. Others there it is technically possible, and we're planning that in. But so for us, it's all about adding more and more in terms of integrations, in terms of features to the system. And there's a lot of changes coming by the end of the year or start of 2021, whether it's project side of the system in terms of ongoing type of work and multiple site visits, multiple reports, rather than that standard survey flow, other report writing, whatever it might be. There's a lot on the way, but I think as an industry it's going to become more connected, and I think we're seeing more and more adoption of firms using tech.
Indeed, it's funny you mentioned that sort of multiple site visit, because obviously, many surveying practices do a real mix of work, and therefore they're dealing with quite different project types in terms of the kind of level of complexity or repeat visits. So it's good to hear that that's the kind of direction of travel. Well, it's been great to talk today, and I look forward to catching up in subsequent months when we can see the kind of developments you're working on. But for today, it's been great, Matt. Thanks very much for taking the time to chat to me.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.